Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Did you like my little animation at the start there? It was so much fun to make. I think I'm going to try and make them for all my videos. Maybe, if I have time. Anyway, today we are experimenting with resin and resin art. I don't know what possessed me to try this, but I just wanted to make some kind of like 3D mixed media thing. I didn't do any research into any kind of resin art. I just kind of dove in head first, which is silly. Um, and I made lots of mistakes, so hopefully throughout this video you guys will learn from my mistakes and not make them if you are inspired to make your own resin artwork. And on that note, let's jump into it. So I didn't actually have much of an idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted it to be in a diamond shape and I knew I wanted to use a dark blue background. That's pretty much it. So when I don't have a very clear idea of what I want to do, I usually use Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint and just sketch out stuff until I have a good idea. Not sure where I got the idea to start doing paint between resin layers. I don't think it was any artist that I saw. It might have been. I do know of some amazing artists now. One in particular, Mal Liquidine. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's amazing. Please check her out. I'll pop her link down below. So for my frame today, I'm using a liquid art panel. Normally these are used to make marbling effects, but I'm going to flip it over and use the back. It's a little bit too deep for me, even though I'm using 3D objects in it. So I'm just going to fill that up with some foam core. I don't want to waste, expensive resin on layers that I don't need. Just as a side note, when you are picking your frame for your resin art, make sure it is deep enough for what you want to do, but the last thing you want is for your resin to start pouring over the top and down the sides. So now I'm just going to use some double-sided tape to stick the foam core down. I'm going to try and cover all of the edges just to make sure that there's the least amount of resin possible sneaking underneath. So now I'm just painting the sides with black acrylic paint. I just want to make sure that you can't see any of that pine colour or even the white foam core through the resin layers, because it's going to distract when most of the background's going to be quite a dark colour. So I'm going to be using this invitation paper for the background. It's kind of 3D, it sort of looks like pebbles. I thought it was pretty cool. And because I need to use a few of them to make up the entire space in my frame, I've actually cut around the pebbles so you can't see like a straight line where they intersect. And it works quite well. I'm going to use the double-sided tape again to put those down. In my test run, I'd actually used glue and it made the paper buckle really badly. So I would highly suggest, if you're using paper, to use double-sided tape to stick it down. So this artwork was called photosynthesis, and I was going to put the real plants inside the layers of resin, and in theory they were still going to be changing colours during the time that it's in that dried resin. And I didn't know if it was going to work at all. I mean, they could have rotted in there or they could have done nothing, but luckily it actually did what I was hoping it would do. I picked these from my garden and then I brought them into my studio and flattened them with my heaviest art books overnight. I've since been told by a resin expert that if you're using live plant matter that you have to put it in with silica for a week or so just to make sure it's dried out. It didn't seem to affect my artwork, so I was just really lucky. So now I'm just gluing everything down with craft glue just to make sure that when I do pour the resin that it doesn't start moving things out of place. And I'm just placing some random heavy objects on top just to make sure when the glue dries that it's going to be dried as flat as possible. And I'm also adding some fabric leaves. And now we're finally getting onto the resin. So I'm using the Craftsmart liquid gloss. It's a part A to part B 1:1 ratio epoxy resin. It's the easiest one to use. All you need to do is pour the exact same amount of each and then mix them together for 2 minutes. Do not, I repeat, do not mix it for any less time, even if you think it's really well mixed, because there is the possibility that it will not dry. And I'm really paranoid about that, so I also mix quite vigorously and make sure it's really mixed well. And then you pour your mixed resin directly onto your artwork and just make sure that it's covering the whole surface. As you can see here, it's not entirely covering my leaves, they're still sticking up, so I'm going to add a second layer of resin. I don't want to use the entire bottle, however, this time, so I've got 2 little plastic shot glasses that have a level measurement on them, and I'm going to use those to make sure that I'm pouring the exact same amount of each part. Annoyingly, I find that that's not enough either, so I just end up using the rest of the bottles. It was a bit of a learning process to work out how much resin covered that amount of space, but I got there in the end. So I've actually found out since I made this one that this particular brand of resin does yellow with time, particularly if you put it in the sun. However, I have seen some artworks that have been made with it that are about 10 years old and they've been sitting in a window with full sun for all that time, and you can't really tell at all unless it's over something white in the artwork and that is also next to something else that is white. You can't tell otherwise. Now that I finally have the correct level of resin, I'm going to use my heat gun just to blow lightly on the top to get rid of any residual bubbles.
Day 2.
So as you can hear, the resin's all nice and hard now, and I'm going to use some acrylic paint on this layer. I kind of wanted to be able to mix paint and like real stuff together, so I'm going to add some leaves that kind of look like the ones I've already got there, but making sure that it does look painterly. I'm also going to paint some little white flowers which match some little white flowers that I picked from the garden earlier, which I'm going to add next. So here is my offerings for this round of sticking stuff onto resin layers. I'm going to start with the little white flowers, as I said. Going back to that resin expert I was talking about earlier, he also told me that adding 3D things within your resin layers is usually a bad idea because air gets caught underneath them, and then during the drying process, when you're not, standing there for 10 hours watching it, the bubbles tend to come out and they get stuck within the resin layer. They don't rise to the top completely and it ruins it. Luckily for me, that didn't happen. So if you're planning on adding 3D things within your resin layers, push down on them, make sure that there is absolutely no air pocketed underneath them and that it's all resin. I'm also going to add some of these skeleton leaves, which I love because when you put the resin on it, it kind of goes completely transparent except for the skeleton part of the leaves. I just think it comes out really nice. I'm like completely obsessed with them now. And we're mixing another couple of layers of resin now for 2 minutes and then pouring it on. I noticed when I poured the resin, it started moving the blue flowers around, so I'm just pushing those back into place with a sewing needle.
Day 3.
Okay, so I'm the worst and I forgot to record this part. But basically I sketched the design I wanted on the computer, I printed it out to size, and then I colored in the back of those pieces of paper with white soft pastel. And then I flipped it back over, put it onto the resin layer, and then drew directly onto the sketch lines, and it transferred directly onto the resin, which you can see here. At this point I realized I actually really liked the white lines as they were without coloring it all in. So I ended up taking a photo of it and then fiddling around with it in Photoshop to see what I could do if I just had the white lines and how that might look. So I decided I liked a combination of the last two ideas. So I got my thin lining brush and got started on lining with white acrylic paint. Now that I'm finished lining and the paint is dry, I'm just taking a damp tissue and I'm going to rub off all of the pastel. I decided once I was finished that the lines weren't quite as neat and clean and thin as I'd like them to be, so I took my darning needle, which I've never ever used for darning, but I find so useful for everything else, and just started very carefully scraping off just little bits that weren't needed in the line work. After that, I decided that she needs some lipstick and some freckles because I'm obsessed with freckles. And I kind of thought they might look like stars or constellations, and I thought that was pretty cool too. So now I want to add that kind of like foggy transparent effect that I did on Photoshop. So I'm going to use some watered down acrylic and then I'm just going to dab at it with a damp tissue. I didn't like the first one I did, so I just wiped it off with a wet tissue and tried again. And we're up to resin layer number 3? 4? 3. Feel like it's 3. I also decided to flatten some more leaves and flowers overnight in some big, thick art books so that they'd be nice and flat for the morning.
Day 4.
So now that the resin's nice and dry, I'm going to pull out all of the flattened leaves from the books and I'm going to start sort of arranging them where I want them and then gluing them down ready for resin. And onto layer 4 of resin. After I laid down this layer of resin, I actually decided to sprinkle some tiny little petals on top. It wouldn't have worked before resin because I couldn't really glue them down, they were so small, and the resin would have just moved them around anyway. So I decided this was the better option, and I kind of just made sure that I pushed them down into the layer. I also made sure to push out any air bubbles I could under any of the other leaves or petals that I put down.
The next day.
So I'm pretty happy with how it's looking now. I decided just to do one more layer of painterly leaves and flowers just to make sure that it all mixes in together as like a odd amalgamation of real and paint. And then I'm going to do another layer of resin. Pro tip, I actually got a bunch of resin on my hands this time, so the easiest way to get it off your hands is to use something that has an oil base. So I'm using a micellar water that's an oil based one. Water doesn't really work, so get something with oil in it. So once that layer of resin is dry, I put my signature in. I wanted it to be on a separate layer just so it's sort of removed from the artwork a little bit. It looks pretty cool in person, if I do say so myself. And then I'm going to do my final layer of resin. And I've completely lost track of how many layers we've done at this point.
Tomorrow.
And now I'm just going to do some finishing touches with black acrylic paint. Mostly just places where I've made mistakes or like accidentally dropped a little bit of paint or something like that. I'm also going to paint all of the outside edges of the frame. Once that's dry, I pop my website on the side. Normally I'd put my name and my website on the back of a piece of artwork, but the surface for the pouring medium just wouldn't hold any kind of paint if I did that, so I thought the side was appropriate. That way, if it's sold, then whoever ends up with it can find me easily if they want to commission me again for something else. And that's it. Experimenting with resin. Had no idea what I was doing, but I think it turned out okay. I'm trying to give you a good look at like the layers so you can see what it looks like, but it's just sort of, it just does not translate unless you see it in person. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you want to have a go at resin art yourself, let me know. I'd love to see what you come up with. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it or learned something or both. If you want to find more of my artwork, you can find my links down below. If you enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you give it a thumbs up so I know. And if you liked this video and want to check out more of my other videos and enjoy those, it'd be awesome if you'd like to subscribe, because I'd love to have you, and as most of the people here know, I'm really bad at posting videos regularly, so at least then you will know when I've posted a video. And on that note, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!